Virginia Tech enters a pivotal year for Brent Pry and the future with this program. This is a program that at one point years ago was one of the more prominent teams in college football. That has since fallen off, and this is a big year based off what we saw last year and what we expect for the 2025 season. And today we're going to take a deep dive into the Virginia Tech Hokies to see what we should expect from this team. Now, last year, a 6-7 finish was disappointing. Truthfully, that was a year that they thought they should have done better. They thought the coaching staff should have done better. Some changes were made, obviously. There's plenty of returning talent that we'll discuss, but some of that returning talent must step up. Now, this is a team that had plenty of close games. I mean, it was 5 one-score games, a couple others that were relatively close. So this is a team that you have to they're going to have to prove, was that just luck, or was this a team that truly was being competitive? And when you look at the teams that they were in those one-score games with, a couple of them were good teams, Miami being one of them. So this is a team that I think has the talent to be competitive with the teams in the ACC. And the ACC is relatively wide open. So it's not like this team can't win football games in this conference. They're not in the Big Ten or the SEC. They're capable of winning football games. And we'll obviously discuss the schedule later in the video, but this is a team that I think if they take a step, you bring in Philip Montgomery offensively to run the show, so you feel like maybe they're going to take a step there, but we'll see. We'll discuss obviously offense, defense, but we'll dive into the roster changes first because that had obviously a major impact on this team, and they also did a good job in the transfer portal, at least in my opinion. Now, you lose quite a bit of talent at wide receiver. You're losing, Daquan Felton, L.E. Jennings, Jalen Lane. That's going to hurt pretty much anybody with that talent. I think that that's going to be a really tough group to replace, and we'll talk about the receivers they bring in and return, but that's a tough trio to see depart. You also lose 2 of your best offensive linemen to the transfer portal in Xavier Chaplin and Braylon Moore. Both of your starting running backs or your contributing running backs are gone. Underrated defensive linemen, and the secondary got depleted pretty much by the NFL and the transfer portal. So that's hard. That's hard to be in that position, but you have to find a way to bounce back. Now, I like what they did in the transfer portal on the offensive line. You bring in multiple West Virginia transfers. You bring in a guy in Terrion Stewart that will be really fun to watch once he gets on campus and is able to take over that running back room. You bring in Braden Bennett. I think people are sleeping on him. You bring in plenty of talent to replace the talent you lost. They did a really good job of identifying what did we lose and what do we need to bring in. So they lose talent at the wide receiver position. They go out and they bring in talent like Donovan Green, like Cam Seldon. Those are guys that will be in the rotation, potentially be the starters. So that's really good on their part. You also bring in plenty of talent on the defensive line. So whether you're bringing in starting talent or bringing in depth, Virginia Tech did a really good job of identifying their needs, which were pretty glaringly obvious, and finding guys that are going to fill those roles. Now, just because you fill those roles doesn't mean that you're automatically going to get things sorted out. So let's just get right into it. Kyron Drones has to be better, plain and simple. Now, Kyron Drones is going to go to a more familiar offense with Philip Montgomery coming in. You run more of that Bryles style offense, and I think that helps him because what we saw from him early in his career was a guy who wasn't thinking, a guy who was just making plays. And obviously it's really hard to do that in this day and age. But if you can find that flow state where you're just making plays, your body isn't thinking, you're just throwing the ball, you're taking off and running, that's going to make Virginia Tech better. There's one position that can make this team immensely better. It's quarterback. And Kyron Drones is going to have to be that guy. Colin Schlee's not here anymore. Pop Watson is at times looking like a good backup. You also bring in Garrett Rangel from Oklahoma State, but I wouldn't get too excited about that. So in terms of ceiling, Kyron Drones has to live up to his potential. Plain and simple. If this offense wants to have a chance And he can do it. I think that's the thing is we can talk about hypotheticals, obviously, of what he needs to do versus what he can't do. We've seen him do it before. And it's not like he was in the group of 5 FCS doing it there and he has to translate. He did it at Baylor. He's done it at Virginia Tech, maybe not consistently, but he has put on a show at times, and that's in him. I think that's still very much in him. And what I like about Philip Montgomery's offense is obviously things didn't work at Auburn, but things I think worked at Tulsa. He just wasn't figuring out the head coaching side of it, but this is a good play caller. He has the ability to create explosive offenses. And I think Virginia Tech is more where his offense is better suited. And I think that he is going to have a really fun time if he can get Kyron Drones to play to the level that he's capable of playing. And we know it's there, like I said. We know that he's capable of being a consistent passer. We know he's capable of being a good runner. It's just you have to do that consistently. Even in the ACC, it's still tough to win games at the Division I level. And if your quarterback isn't playing to the level he's capable of, you're going to have a tough time. You're going to have to find different options that maybe you're not necessarily prepared for. That's going to be a lot on him. But again, if he feels comfortable, if he learns this system and feels like he's in a better place, then you don't necessarily have to worry about that. You don't have to be concerned about what Kyron Drones can do. You will be more focused on how do we expose certain defenses? What kind of plays can we run that will allow him to showcase his talent even more? And part of that's going to be on the rushing attack as well. Part of running the football is helping your passing attack. And this is a group that finished 43rd last year. Now, Bicel Tuten is not walking back into the door. He's gone to the NFL. You didn't have the talent that you felt was going to be ACC worthy right off the bat. So you go and you bring in Terrion Stewart. Terrion Stewart rushed for almost 900 yards and 6 touchdowns on a Bowling Green team that most people knew who Harold Fannin was, but nobody else knew pretty much anybody else on that roster. Terrion Stewart is a good option, and they feel like he is their number one guy. And he is going to be a solid option. Now, he does not have the speed that Tuten has. He does not have that 4.3 speed, but he's a solid runner who averaged 5 yards a carry last year. Now, who is behind him is probably the bigger question. Braden Bennett is one of those options. Marcellus Hawkins from Central Missouri, Jeremiah Coney. Those are 3 guys that give you decent depth. And I think Braden Bennett has the ability to be really fun in this offense. Last year at Coastal Carolina was a good year for him. 781 yards and 11 touchdowns, almost 200 yards receiving and 2 more scores. I think that he is a big X factor for this team because if he steps up in a big way, you can utilize him in the rushing attack. You can utilize him in the passing attack. That opens things up for Philip Montgomery. Now, Hawkins comes in with 144 yards last year and 2 touchdowns. Coney had 179 yards, averaged 5.6 yards per carry. So again, while you lose quite a bit of talent, and Tuten is obviously going to be a big miss for them in terms of they're not going to like what the offense is without him. However, if you look at what they did in the transfer portal, Tuten was a perfect example of this staff's ability to identify talent that can be really good and fit the system well. Maybe they've done that again with the 2 guys they bring in, and maybe they feel that if we don't hit on Stewart, but we hit on Bennett, that's still a win. You still have somebody that's going to run the offense, or vice versa. If you miss on Bennett and you hit on Stewart, you got your number one guy. That's a big thing for this team. And that's really exciting, honestly, because you have, again, a lot of potential. You have to see a step taken by certain players. You know, Drones is one of them. The running backs will have to be another group as well. But this is a group, like I said, that has excitement if you truly watch their games and just wait for them to translate it to the ACC level. The passing attack is where we really need to see development. That obviously starts with the quarterback position. We've talked about that. But I think that you can see, if you watch Kyron Drones, there are glimpses of it. Now, again, the biggest problem with him is consistency. So I'm not saying that this is a given. But there is plenty of potential with him and with the guys he's going to throw to. Now, the consistent piece of this group is Benji Gosnell at tight end. Even though only 341 yards and 2 touchdowns, his last name is a name that people obviously know. They know that he is a capable tight end. The quarterback's going to have to find ways to get him the ball, or he's going to have to find chemistry with guys who come in with various levels of experience. Aiden Green is a returner for this team, 268 yards and 2 touchdowns as a rotational piece. Maybe he gets to be more of a part of this offense than he was last year. That's really exciting. I think that his potential is going to be fun to watch with Kyron Drones. You bring in Cam Seldon, who played running back last year for Tennessee, but he came to Tennessee as a wide receiver. He's flipping back to wide receiver, so that'll be fun to see what is he capable of doing, because I think he's relatively unknown as a wide receiver, and Virginia Tech's hoping that they struck gold with him, and we'll find out pretty quick if that is the case. Donovan Green, when healthy, is one of the most dangerous players in college football, one of the most dangerous wide receivers in college football. In his limited time with Wake Forest last year, he averaged 16.5 yards per catch. At his peak, he is a dangerous downfield threat that stretches the defense for everybody. That helps Kyron Drones. That also gives Kyron Drones a deep target when he wants to take a shot. He knows Donovan Green is capable of getting open. So there's plenty of options for him. It's just how consistently are those options going to contribute for him. The depth behind him is a lot more questions, but Isaiah Spencer, I think, could be an absolute gem if he translates. Jackson State, obviously, he comes in from there. 660 yards last season. Chance Wiggins is a guy that they really like. They think that he is going to be really fun for this team. And then it kind of depends who else you think has a chance. You could see maybe Keelan Adams is one of those guys, Tucker Holloway, Taki Heath. You're looking at guys that are young and inexperienced, but I think this staff feels like maybe they have something that a lot of people don't know. So we'll see what happens with that. That's a group that, again, I think this group has plenty of potential. I think that they have the ability to surprise a lot of people, which goes in their favor. There's probably some times where teams are going to sleep on them, and that gives them opportunities to showcase their talent. That gives them opportunities to run past them and hit them in the mouth when they're not ready. The tight end position could be a more prominent position if that's not the case, or even if it is the case. Benji Gosnell is obviously going to have a big year. I think that he is a really good target at 6'5", 254 pounds. Harrison St. Germain, another good option. He plays a more prominent role this year, in my opinion. Then you have relatively inexperienced players at tight end, but they've seen the field. You know, Jerishus Hairston, Zeke Wimbush, both played 13 games on special teams, so they didn't get to play in the offense, but maybe with the two guys you have, you need a third or fourth. So those are two options as well. And both those guys have good size too. Same with St. Germain. Those are guys that can be big-time contributors and could make life a lot easier for Kyron Drones, for this offense, and that's exactly what you need. You need guys to step up, and it doesn't matter how many, you can't have too many, I should say. You cannot have too many contributors. The more contributors you have, the more comfortable Kyron Drones is. The more guys that win their routes, that win their matchups, the better Kyron Drones plays. And then the most obvious thing is obviously, what does the offensive line do to be their part of the contribution? How do they make life easier? Now, you do bring in quite a bit of talent from the transfer portal. You bring in multiple guys from West Virginia, which when you hire an offensive line coach that was there, you're probably going to bring some guys with you. That being said, there are 3 guys that could start for Virginia Tech this year that were from West Virginia. 2 of them are in the lineup. Now, the returning guys, Laith Ghanem, Brody Meadows, and Matavius Cunningham, to me, are going to start in their positions. There's plenty of questions with the relative inexperience, but again, I'm not sure who you're going to replace them with. Johnny Garrett is a guy that will definitely play a part of that as well. He can play either tackle spot. Hans Hammer could be another guy that is going to be a contributor as well, but I think Cunningham and Ghanem are the two guys right now. Garrett could be a starter as well. Maybe it'll be a rotation. We'll see. But I feel confident in those two guys at starting positions, and Garrett is a good depth piece to have. Brody Meadows has plenty of experience, just doesn't have a ton of starting experience. Only 2 starts under his belt, but he's played 24 games. West Virginia transfers, Tomas Rimac, plenty of experience, 38 games under his belt, 13 starts last year. He is by far their best offensive lineman. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Kyle Altuner is a kind of a wild card right now. Didn't play. He was hurt last year. So we're not really sure what he's going to give them, but he obviously has the confidence of this team. They know what they're getting from him despite that injury. He's going to probably start at center. Behind him, Tommy Ricard is another guy that could contribute. The center position is kind of up in the air. When you have a guy coming in from the transfer portal that doesn't have any experience, that's usually kind of a concern, but this staff knows what they have, especially when you bring in a new coach that's very familiar with him. That'll be really interesting to watch. Other guys that could contribute, you brought in Jaden Muskrat from Auburn, the former Tulsa transfer, started 9 games last year for Auburn, so coming from the SEC to the ACC gives you a good depth piece. Maybe if he needs to start, you feel confident that he can do that. Lucas Austin is the final West Virginia guy that could be in at guard. Again, the right guard is probably more in question than the left guard. The only thing that makes that different is if it's an injury or something like that. But I think overall, this staff did a good job of keeping the guys they needed to. They did lose a couple of guys in the transfer portal. Like I said, you lose Xavier Chaplin, you lose Braden Moore. I mean, you lose a good group of contributors for this group. Parker Clemens, Caden Moore, Braylon Moore, Bob Schick, Xavier Chaplin. That's a tough group to lose, but also they did a good job of developing guys, giving them experience, and now they get chances to step up. And that's kind of the theme of this offense, is that they'll have opportunities to showcase their talent. They'll have opportunities to prove that they can compete at this level. And I like where they're sitting currently. The offense, to me, I think is in a little bit different position than the defense, even with some of those guys having to prove themselves. But the defense, they did a really good job of bringing guys in to compete and potentially start right away. The defensive line is a perfect example of that. Ben Bell was a production monster at Texas State, even in his 4 games last year. 13 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. So I think that you're looking at a guy who can do it in the Sun Belt level, but can he do it at the ACC? One nice thing is that people are probably going to maybe doubt him a little bit, but when you're on the opposite side of James Joncom, you feel like you're in a great place to showcase your talent. Now, he also has to showcase what he can do at the next level, but this is a tandem that can show exactly what they're capable of doing, what they need to do to prove that they're capable of playing at this level and playing with the best of the best. Because you're going from Eastern Michigan and Texas State to Virginia Tech, that's going to be hard to adjust. But again, this staff feels confident in what they brought in. The depth behind them is very exciting too. I think Keyshawn Burgos is going to be a part of the rotation. Another guy that can get to the backfield, can be disruptive. Asen Stevens is another player to keep an eye on. Jason Abbey, 2 guys that maybe don't have a ton of experience last year, but I think that they're ready to be a part of this rotation, and how they do probably right away in limited opportunities could be a big difference in how much depth this team has. And pretty much just like everybody in college football, Virginia Tech went to the transfer portal to help the interior defensive line. They obviously have 2 guys coming back in Kamari Copeland and Kevin Gilliam Jr. that they feel confident in as the starters. Now, Copeland only played in 4 games last year, but he has experience prior to that where he is someone that I think is in good hands, even with just the 4 games. He is someone who is ready for this starting opportunity and is ready to compete at a high level. Then you bring in, like I said, you bring in quite a bit of talent, which is good. I think that you identified some diamonds in the rough. Cody Huisman comes in from NDSU. Didn't have a ton of production, but if you watch his film, very disruptive player. Emmanuel Hickman comes in from USF, the former ECU and USF transfer, is experienced at that level, but again, translating that to the next level. So if you have concerns about this group, it's probably the how many guys from the group of 5 FCS level can take their game up to a power 4 level. This staff, like I said, I think has done a good job of identifying talent in the past and getting it to play, but there's always some concerns that maybe it doesn't work out. Arius Nash is another guy, comes in from Mercer. So the depth behind Copeland and Gilliam are relatively unproven, and there's probably some more questions than answers with that group, but you at least have depth pieces. You at least feel confident in what you brought in, and from there it's coaching them up, getting them to play at a different level, and hoping that that all works out in the end. The linebacker position is kind of similar. However, I think that they feel very confident about the talent they brought in, and you don't necessarily have as many concerns about making a jump to that power 4 level. Caleb Woodson and Jaden Keller come back. Those are 2 guys that I think are flying under the radar right now. Even when you lose a talented player like Cole Nelson up front, if you want to call him a linebacker, I guess, Sam Brumfield and Keely Lawson departing, those also kind of hurt. But Caleb Woodson and Jaden Keller were very good last year, combined for 155 tackles, 10 tackles for loss. They can take another step. I think that there is another level to their game that they have not hit yet, and that's really exciting if you're a Virginia Tech fan. And Virginia Tech's in the past had very good linebacker play. If they want to get back to the tradition of winning football games at a high level, the linebackers have to be big-time contributors on the defensive side of the ball. And Woodson and Keller have the ability to do that. Now, it might look different because you're looking at 2 guys that are pushed, at 230 pounds, 235 pounds. That's a little different than what it used to look like. So it's a new era of college football, but the linebackers can very much still make contributions that make this defense tremendously better. And I really like what they're capable of doing. You just have to, again, raise this defense's play. And with their so much turnover being up front and behind them, there's a little bit more for them to do, for them to prove in order to compete at that level. Now, the transfer talent they bring in for depth is really exciting. Jordan Bass, they're thrilled about. They think that he could be part of this rotation, even if Woodson and Keller take a step. I think that with this day and age of fast-paced offenses, you need depth. You need guys that can spell some of these players. Jordan Bass is one of those guys. Michael Short, they're really excited about too, coming in from North Carolina. So you brought in talent that you're very familiar with from the ACC, and those guys should be able to step in and contribute right away. Antoine Santiago, another guy coming from Temple, so maybe you're less proven than some of those other guys. You're maybe a little more concerned about his abilities, but I know the staff likes him. They feel like he's a good depth piece. And then Caleb Spencer. Caleb Spencer, I think for some people, they're penciling him in the secondary, but he comes to the linebacker position, and I think that he's a really fun piece to have at the linebacker position. And again, another depth piece that understands this defense, understands what this defense is trying to do schematically, where he needs to be. So this is a good group. This is a deep group that has plenty of talent. And if the starters, like I said, if Woodson and Keller can take their steps to the next level, this is a very dangerous defense because they'll be able to mop up any plays from missed up front. They'll also make life on the guys behind them easier by making disruptive plays. And there's plenty of change in the secondary, so that's going to help. The secondary is going to miss the play of Dorian Strong. They're going to miss Manzor Delane. You're going to miss Jalen Stroman, Mose Phillips. Those are guys that, plain and simple, are tough to replace. But I also think that they did a good job in the transfer portal, as well as developing talent on campus. I think that's going to be a part that gets overlooked a lot because a lot of people just think, oh, well, we'll just replace somebody in the transfer portal. High school recruiting is very much still prominent and very much an important part of your program's development. If you can develop the guys that you have on campus, you don't have to worry about the transfer portal as much. And you've seen already Virginia Tech has done plenty of that They have done plenty of adding talent from the transfer portal, and the secondary is no exception. But I like the talent that they bring back from this group for this group as well. Thomas Williams and Quentin Reddish are examples of that. It's same with Dante Levette. Those are 3 guys that should start this year, and those are guys that have been on campus already. I think that you feel really good about those 3 and what they are capable of doing. Quentin Reddish got plenty of experience last year, and I like his frame at 6'3", 205 pounds. The cornerback position with Williams and Levette, you feel like they're in a good spot. You feel like they have plenty of experience. Now they get a chance to step their game up into a different capacity, into a different role that they didn't have last year. Isaiah Brown Murray gives you some depth at different pieces. He's probably going to start at the star position. Maybe he can play safety. We'll see. They like what his flexibility gives them defensively. Same thing with the safeties that they'll have. Isaiah Cash comes in from Sam Houston. Sherrod Coville comes in from Clemson. Those are 2 guys that are going to push for starting spots, and we'll push Reddish, and then Rice transfer Tyson Flowers. They are really excited about bringing him in, and it might honestly be an or situation. So Reddish or Tyson Flowers and Cash and Coville are the 2 guys that should be right there to step up in a big way. Christian Ellis was extremely productive at New Mexico. That's another guy that'll be part of the rotation. So you have plenty of options. It's just who's going to be the guy that steps up? Who's going to be the guy that comes in and makes plays? They have guys that are returning. They bring in talent from the transfer portal, whether that's potential or production. You have plenty of that at the safety position. The cornerback position maybe is a little bit up in the air. Christian Williams and Caleb Brown are going to be options. Brown comes in from Hawaii, relatively productive for the Rainbow Warriors. But again, taking that step to the Power 4 level is going to be a question. And that's something that people are going to question until he proves himself. But I like him. I like his game. I think he's a good depth piece for this position, especially a position that is maybe has some concerns, and you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. And that's what happens when you lose starters. Virginia Tech obviously lost a lot to the NFL. They lost a lot to the transfer portal. But there's a reason for optimism. And maybe it's because their backs are against the wall. Maybe it's Brent Pry feels the heat of his seat getting hot. Who knows? But I think that this group is a bunch of underdogs that are ready to embrace that role. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. And honestly, part of the lore of Virginia Tech football was this is a group that even when they were a top 25 team, there were still teams in the ACC better than them, but they didn't care. They focused on what they did well. They focused on, we're a bunch of guys that these schools didn't want, and we are going to find a way to win these football games. If they can get back to that mentality, this is going to be a better team. Enter Sandman is going to take on an entirely different level of feeling that we haven't seen since that era. It has been a while since, don't get me wrong, Enter Sandman, first of all, best entrance in college football. I argue with a wall. This is the best entrance in college football. When Virginia Tech is playing really good football, it's electric. Even when they're not at the beginning of the year, it's still electric. This is, and it's a destination for people purely to watch a football team run onto the field. That's how exciting it is. Obviously, it hasn't lived up to the hype. The team hasn't lived up to the hype lately because it's just been a tough scene. But if they can get back to where they are, or where they used to be, I should say, this is going to be a fun team to watch. Now, the schedule is going to make that a tiny bit challenging. Now, if you're able to pull off some surprises, this could be, and I don't even want to call this a prediction. I'm not really predicting their record right now, but where I see their win total, and maybe that'll change as I look at it a little bit more, their over under is 6.5. 7-5 is the ceiling with this schedule that I'm looking at. 5-7 is the floor. So I don't know where you're going to find some of those wins, but it'll be interesting to see how they're able to bounce back. Now, the voting on this from the channel is all over the place. 26% of people think they're finishing first through fourth. And that's where that applies to. You're going to have to surprise some people. 41% thinks fifth through eighth, 26% 9th through 12th, and then there's 7% 13th through 17th. I think the most likely option is 5th through 8th or 9th through 12th. That just feels like where they're penciled in. Where you start seeing that 26% is when you start picking off teams that you're not necessarily expected to beat. Then the same on the flip side, 13th through 17th, near the bottom. That means Brent Pry is gone. Even 9th through 12th, Brent Pry is most likely gone. So you're looking at a change, whereas the top two, you're feeling pretty good about. South Carolina to start the year is not an ideal way to start your season. South Carolina comes in with a ton of hype, a ton of excitement. Shane Beamer's done a really good job, and that's a tough game to win. I do not think they're going to win that game, but weird things have happened in week one. Every year there's a handful of teams that did anybody expect Arizona State to have the year they did? No, everyone picked them to be towards the bottom of the conference. I'm not comparing Virginia Tech to Arizona State, but the things that we talked about earlier in the video, those are things that can make Virginia Tech better. Kyron Drones being able to develop and settle into this offense makes him better, makes this team better. South Carolina is not without change. They lost a ton on the defensive line. That's going to be something they have to replace. They lost really good linebackers. Their quarterback has to take a step as well. Now, Lenora Sellers is better than Kyron Drones right now, but if he does not develop and Kyron Drones takes a step, we're looking at one of the more exciting games of the beginning of the season. The hard part is that if you win that, your reward is you get to play Vanderbilt. So you could start 2-0. It's not likely. 1-1 is probably more likely. I think that Virginia Tech can beat Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt more likely than they can beat South Carolina. But you could also be 0-2. And that's where you really have a ton of pressure. Your backs are against the wall. But again, the ACC is so wide open that here's where we discuss how you get to a surprising part of the season. Old Dominion is a win. Wofford is a win. I don't think you have to worry about that. I do think that Old Dominion is a surprise team in 2025, but I think that Virginia Tech, if they play to the level they're capable of, is definitely capable and is the better team. NC State is going through some transition. We'll see what happens there. Virginia Tech can very much win that game. Wake Forest is a winnable game. They're going through a transition as well. Georgia Tech was the surprise last year. Another team, perfect example within the ACC. Georgia Tech was not a team that people expected to beat Florida State at the beginning of the year, to nearly beat Georgia. There's a plenty of excitement around that program. That's a game that people are going to expect Georgia Tech to win. Now, it's a road trip, so that's hard. But at this point, I think either this is going to be a surprise team, Virginia Tech, or Brent Pry's gone at this point. I don't think that he's going to make it this far. Depending one way, if it's going bad, he's not going to make it. If they're doing well, he's in the running for Coach of the Year. Then you get a bye before hosting Cal in Louisville. Now, Louisville, I think a lot of people right now would say Louisville is a better team than Virginia Tech. That being said, we'll see. I'm not saying, and this is maybe just like my excitement towards Virginia Tech football, but that's a team that a lot of people just expect to be good, and Jeff Brom deserves that credit. But if Virginia Tech is exceeding expectations, all of a sudden that is a winnable game. At Florida State is a beatable team, even though they'll be better. That is a beatable team. Miami, you want to say that Miami is a loss for sure, but then you look at last year, that was supposed to be a loss too, and it was, but it was closer than you expect. And then Virginia could be better too. That's a rivalry game, so it's going to be close. So this is a team that's kind of all over the place, but it's all over the place in a bad way. It's all over the place in a good way too. So this is where we get to be excited, and we lean towards the optimistic side in the preseason. It's a new season. You don't know what this team is yet. You think of the potential it could be, and that grows excitement. I think that Brent Pry has a lot of work to do. I think his program, his roster is going through change. That's a tough thing to do, but also you have a lot of excitement. You have a lot of potential. And if they've done what they think they've done in terms of adding the right players, getting the right players in, adding the right coordinator, this is a team that could be a surprise team. Right now, to be realistic, 5-7 to 7-5, it makes the most sense. Where that is wrong is when you're starting to see the success. And at the beginning of the season will set those expectations. But after that, they get a chance to bounce back and play in an ACC where you don't have to play Clemson, you don't have to play SMU, but you have opportunities to surprise people like Georgia Tech, like Louisville, like Florida State. Maybe if it's a repeat of last year, maybe you give Miami a run for their money or surprise them. I'm not going to rule that out, but I'm also going to try to keep these deep dives realistic. That being said, I can't wait to listen to Enter Sandman. I can't wait to play it in the video game. Virginia Tech might be my dynasty team this year. Who knows? But this is a team that I think has plenty of excitement despite the hot seat for their coach, despite their backs against the wall. And maybe that's the formula they need to get to where they need to be in 2025.